Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, February the 25th, and welcome to our commentary. There's some breaking news here over the last hour or so. President Biden has will be nominating a lady jurist to the Supreme Court. I don't know much about the lady. We're going to be looking at that nomination probably a little bit when we talk with our friend Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda, in an upcoming podcast. So for the moment, all I can report is that he has made a selection. I really thought it was going to be the lady from South Carolina. There was a judge from South Carolina with a pretty good reputation, and she had the support of two of South Carolina's Republican senators, Scott and Graham, which of course would have made it a lot easier for her to go through the nominating process. That was not the choice. The choice is a lady from the D.C. Court of Appeals. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. She will go through the motions, and exactly when the hearings will take place, I don't know. I assume in the next 60 days or so, the hearings will take place, but we will see. We're going to hold judgment because I really don't know much about this lady. All I know is that many of her opinions have been reversed on appeals, but that doesn't necessarily tell you much about the jurist. There's a lot of factors that go into something like that. So we're just going to wait and see what we can learn about this lady when we start learning more about her opinions and some of her positions over the years. Now, today we're going to take a look at the upcoming 2022 election, the so-called midterms. Now, as you know, historically, midterms are problematic for the president, whether it was Trump in 2018, Obama in 2010, Clinton in 1994, President Bush in 1990, the first Bush, even President Reagan in 1982. Presidents get hit hard in the first midterm. The only exception in recent history was the second President Bush, George W. Bush. He actually picked up the Senate in 2012 and cut his losses significantly in the House. Of course, he was at that time, that was right after, within a year of 9/11, when he was riding very high in the approvals. So, that was probably maybe a bit exceptional. But usually the first midterm is really bad for the president. And it looks like the same thing is going to happen to President Biden. So we're going to take a look at some numbers here and try to give you a sense of why we feel positive that as a Republican, why we feel positive about 2022. Let's begin with President Biden. And by the way, the measurement that we're going to use for this polling data is what we like to call the RCP average. RCP means Real Clear Politics. This is a great website, by the way. If you're not following Real Clear Politics, you're really missing out on some of the best news coverage around. They're just fantastic. I mean, they usually give you points of view from both sides. And I think you've got to read what the other side is writing, so at least you know what their arguments are. And that's one of the good things about Real Clear Politics. You get both sides, and you get articles. You get articles from both sides of the political world. The other good thing that they do at Real Clear Politics is that they've come up with something called the RCP average. And what they do is they take the last 5 polls, the last 10 polls, whenever they have that many polls, and they average them. So they give you, an idea of the tendency of the polling data. So we're going to be using that today to take a look at where we're going at this point, or how it looks like 8 months before the election. Of course, the election is going to be on the first Tuesday of November, and here we are almost 8 months before that first Tuesday of November. Let's take a look at President Biden, and let's take a look at his approval rate. Right now, his approval rate over the last 10 polls, his approval rate is 41%. So the average is 41%. The disapproval is 53%. So that's not good. That's not a good number at all for President Biden. And frankly, it's been that way since the summer. And with the inflation and the gasoline prices and everything else, it's hard to see how that's going to change. it's hard to see how that's going to change. So clearly, President Biden, as of this point, 8 months before the election, is in deep political trouble. And that's, of course, the reason why so many Democrats do not want to campaign with him. They simply do not want him around. We see that here in Texas, where President Biden is not going to do a lot of campaigning for Texas Democrats, and we see it in other places as well. So the numbers are not good for President Biden. In the last 10 polls, he's averaging 41%. That's not a very good number. Now, it gets even worse when you break them down. For example, on the economy, his approval rate is 37%. That's not good. On foreign policy, 38%. Now, we don't know if the Ukraine situation has been included in these numbers. Probably not. But I don't see great things for President Biden out of Ukraine, because it's a very difficult situation, as we discussed yesterday, because Ukraine is causing the price of gasoline to increase, and that's going to hurt him with American public opinion. The last number, and this is shocking, 33% overall on immigration. Now, a lot of that, frankly, is the border, what's happening on the border. That's what is just devastating. I mean, what is happening on the border is devastating and hurting President Biden quite a bit. And it's hurting him, interestingly enough, for example, in South Texas, with a lot of Hispanics who live down there. It's hurting them a lot with him, because they're seeing the crime and all the chaos related to this illegal immigration situation, and they're saying, what the heck's going on here? Well, 33% is a very bad number, and that's today his approval rating when it comes to immigration, border, and so on. So not good numbers at all for President Biden. Now, what they like to call the generic, this is an interesting indicator. The generic is when they ask people, who would you vote for Congress, a Democrat or a Republican? They don't put a name on the question. They simply say, do you want to vote Democrat or do you want to vote Republican? At the moment, the Republicans have a +3 advantage on that question. Now, this is a poll that has been a bit up and down. Some polls have shown Republicans up by 13. Recently, one had the Democrats up by 6. But overall, the average is Republicans +3, which is, again, a good number for Republicans, because these generic polls historically have understated Republican support. So +3 at this stage of the game is a good number for the Republicans. And the evidence that the Democrats are worried about 2022 is the number of Democrats who have been retiring. I think something like 30 have already retired. They're not going to be seeking re-election in 2022. Now let's take a look at governor. We have, of course, a governor's race here in Texas, and that is between Governor Abbott and former Representative Beto O'Rourke. At the moment, the race, the last 6 or 7 polls have Governor Abbott up by 9, +9. The very latest poll is 52-45, +7. I've said many times that I think those are the numbers that we will see in November, 53-46, 54-45. That's where I think the race is going to look like on Election Day. I think Governor Abbott is going to be reelected by anywhere from 5 to 7 points. I think that's going to be the final number. The problem for Beto O'Rourke is that he continues to be around 40%. He has not been able to break through and get into the high 40s so that he can be more competitive. On the other hand, Governor Abbott has been a little bit under 50 now, a bit over 50 in this latest poll. And if you're the Abbott team, you got to look at those numbers and feel pretty good, because in roughly a week and a half, when the primary is over, all of the attacks against the governor, the attacks about the border and all of that will be over, because all of those candidates are not going to defeat him in the primary. So the focus then is going to become then Abbott versus O'Rourke. And I think many of the Republicans who didn't vote for the governor in the primary, roughly anywhere from 35 to 45% of the party, will come home and vote for the governor on election day, and that's going to make the numbers, the governor's numbers, even better. So I think overall, I feel pretty good about the upcoming 2022 election. I think the Republicans have a chance to do well. How well depends a great deal on turnout. I would say right now that I would predict about 30 seats in the House, a pickup of about 30 seats. The Senate is always more complicated, but I'm going to go ahead and predict that the Republicans will pick up 2 or 3 seats. I think the seat in Georgia looks really, really good. There's also a good possibility in Arizona. There's a possibility in New Mexico. And I think somewhere in that mix, the Republicans will end up with about 52 seats and have a majority, a small majority, but nevertheless a majority in the U.S. Senate. So overall, as I said, things are looking good right now for the GOP headed to the 2022 election. Before we go, I want to say one quick thing. We remembered today one of my favorite baseball players. Growing up, one of my favorite baseball players was a guy named Ron Santo. I guess I could always pronounce his last name. Maybe that's why I was such a fan of him. But Ron Santo used to play third base for the Chicago Cubs. And as you know, I grew up in Wisconsin, and for a while there, we didn't have a baseball team because the Braves moved to Atlanta. So we used to get a lot of the games on the radio, the Cubs games on the radio. And so I was a huge fan of Ron Santo, the third baseman. And he was born on this day, 1940. He passed away in 2010, and it's kind of sadly, he passed away, and a couple of years later, he was elected to the Hall of Fame. But he was one of my favorite players growing up, Ron Santo, the great third baseman for the Chicago Cubs. So good old Ron. I still have some of his baseball cards somewhere in my box of baseball cards. Actually, my brother is the one who has been holding on to all those cards. He was always afraid that I would give them away, which I used to do. So anyway, Ron Santo with the Chicago Cubs, we remember him. Well, thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. And if today's your birthday, happy birthday. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll talk to you.